The night Sabine Orra climbed into the back of Tomas Venn's wagon, she did not know whether the silent mountain man would save her, betray her, or leave her buried beneath the winter snow. She only knew that Adrian Kells's riders were less than a minute behind her, their lanterns cutting through the darkness like pale knives, while their horses pounded the frozen road, hard enough to shake the ground beneath her boots. Sabine pulled herself over the wagon gate with both hands, her heavy body straining against the wet wood, and fell among sacks of flour, iron traps, and rough wool blankets. Before she could catch her breath, a man's voice came from the front seat. It was low, tired, and without surprise. "You are making a great deal of noise for someone trying not to be found." Sabine froze. Through a gap in the canvas, she saw the broad outline of the driver. He wore a dark coat, a weather-beaten hat, and the kind of stillness that belonged to someone who had spent too many years alone. "Please," she whispered, "they will drag me back." The riders were already near. Tomas Venn turned his head slightly, as if listening not to her words but to the fear inside them. Then he pulled one blanket over the open sacks behind him and said, "Lie down. Do not speak unless I speak to you." Sabine obeyed. A moment later, Adrian Kells's men surrounded the wagon. Their leader raised a lantern and shouted, "Venn, we are looking for a large woman in a grey dress. She stole papers from Mr. Kells and ran from lawful custody." Tomas did not move. "I have seen no thief," the man laughed. "Hard to miss her. She is built like a grain shed." Another rider snorted, "More like a whole barn with boots." Sabine pressed one hand over her mouth as the men laughed above her. She had heard worse words in the daylight, but hearing them while she lay hidden in the dark made them feel colder. The leader leaned closer to Tomas. "We will search the wagon." Tomas lifted his eyes. "My wife is sleeping in the back." The laughter stopped. Sabine's heart seemed to stop with it. The rider looked over Tomas's shoulder. "Your wife?" "She is ill," Tomas said, "and she does not enjoy strange men lifting her blankets." There was something in his voice that made the rider hesitate. Tomas Venn had no reputation for violence, but he had the reputation of a man who did not make empty statements. The leader finally lowered the lantern. "You married?" he asked. Tomas stared at him. "Is that your business?" The rider muttered something beneath his breath, pulled his horse aside, and waved the others forward. When the sound of hooves faded into the trees, Sabine remained still beneath the blanket. Tomas drove another quarter-mile before stopping. He climbed down, opened the back of the wagon, and looked at her for the first time. His face was lean and rough, his beard touched with early gray, and his eyes held no warmth. They also held no disgust. Sabine had learned that the absence of disgust could feel almost like kindness.
"Get out,"
he said.
"They may circle back."
She stared at him.
"You just told them I was your wife."
"I told them what made them leave. And now?" Tomas looked toward the dark road. "Now you tell me why men carrying Adrian Kells's guns are hunting you." 3 days earlier, Sabine had stood in the middle of Bellwether's courthouse square, while half the town watched Adrian Kells take her father's farm. Snow had not yet begun to fall, but the sky was iron gray, and a bitter wind moved dust along the street. The farm auction had drawn merchants, ranch hands, widows, farmers, and people who had no reason to be there, except that public ruin was cheaper than theater. Sabine stood beside the courthouse steps in the same brown dress she had worn to bury her father 6 weeks before. The seams pressed tightly across her shoulders and waist. She had repaired the dress twice, but poor cloth could not be persuaded to become more generous. Near the hitching rail, 2 young men from the livery looked her over. One whispered too loudly, "Maybe Kells can sell her by the pound and clear the debt." The other answered, "No buyer has that much storage." Their laughter carried. Sabine kept her eyes on the auction clerk, though every word reached her. She had spent 27 years pretending not to hear people. She had been called slow because she spoke carefully, lazy because she was large, greedy because she accepted a second piece of bread after working from sunrise to dark, and desperate because she remained unmarried. Her father had always told her that a person did not become small simply because others refused to see her full size. On that morning, with his land being sold beneath her feet, the lesson felt harder to believe. Adrian Kells stood at the edge of the crowd, in a dark blue coat with polished brass buttons. He was not an old man. He was only 40, handsome in a clean and narrow way, with smooth hair, a careful smile, and pale eyes that never seemed touched by the emotions his face pretended to show. He owned the grain mill, the freight office, 2/3 of the storefronts on Main Street, and nearly every note of debt held by the farmers around Bellwether. He also owned the sheriff's loyalty, the newspaper editor's silence, and the private shame of many citizens who had accepted his favors. When the auction clerk announced that Kells had purchased the Orra farm for the value of the unpaid note, there was a murmur in the crowd, but no one objected. Sabine stepped forward. "That note is false." The clerk lowered his papers. Sheriff Pate moved closer. Adrian Kells smiled as if she had made a childish mistake. "Miss Orra, this has been explained to you. My father never borrowed $6,000 from you. Your father signed the agreement. The signature is copied." Kells' smile remained. Grief can confuse the mind. Sabine looked at the faces around her. Mrs. Bell from the dry goods shop lowered her eyes. Mr. Lyle, who had eaten at the Orra table every harvest for 11 years, suddenly became interested in his boots. Even Reverend Hale looked toward the courthouse clock. Sabine's voice trembled, but she forced it to carry. "My father kept every receipt. He wrote every purchase in 2 ledgers. He did not borrow money without telling me." A woman near the back whispered, "She cannot accept the truth." Another answered, "Pride is an ugly thing on anyone." Then the livery boy called, "Some things look uglier than pride." More laughter followed. Adrian Kells climbed the courthouse steps until he stood beside her. He did not touch Sabine. He had learned that he could frighten people more by keeping his hands clean. "Your father made poor choices," he said quietly. "You do not have to share his end." Sabine turned toward him. "What does that mean?" "It means I am willing to be generous. You have stolen my home. The law has taken your home. You arranged the law." His smile thinned. "Careful." "Or what?" Sabine asked. "You will forge my name too?" The crowd became silent. Sheriff Pate shifted one hand toward his belt. Kells looked out over the people as if inviting them to notice how patient he was being. "Miss Orra is distressed," he said. "Her father left her with no money, no property, and no useful prospects. I have offered her a respectable position in my household." Sabine felt heat rise into her face. "You offered marriage in exchange for silence." A shocked breath moved through the crowd. Kells stepped closer. "I offered protection." "From you?" she asked. His pale eyes hardened. The change lasted only a second, but Sabine saw it. "A woman alone should consider the difference between courage and foolishness," he said, "and a woman in your situation should not expect many offers." His gaze moved slowly over her body. He did not need to insult her openly. The crowd understood. So did Sabine. He believed her humiliation had prepared her for gratitude. Sabine looked at him and remembered the last clear conversation she had shared with her father. Elias Orra had been ill for months, though no doctor could explain why his strength vanished so quickly. On the evening before his death, he had asked Sabine to bring him the blue seed book from the kitchen shelf. The book contained planting dates, crop counts, and weather notes from every season of her childhood. Elias had opened it with trembling hands and pointed to a page covered with small circles, crooked lines, and numbers written beside the names of apple trees. "Do you remember the North Orchard game?" he had asked. Sabine smiled despite her worry. "You made me count the rows backward, not backward, by shadow length. That too." His breath had grown shallow. "You always saw what others missed." She had taken his hand. "What are you trying to tell me?" Elias looked toward the window. "Men have been asking about my records." "What men?" "Do not trust a seal because it looks official. Do not trust a witness because he speaks loudly. And do not let anyone convince you that you are too simple to understand what you see." Sabine had leaned closer. "Father, are you in danger?" He squeezed her fingers with the little strength he had left. The truth is not gone, it is only divided. Those were the last words he spoke clearly. After the auction, Sheriff Pate gave Sabine until sunset to gather her belongings from the farm. Kells' new foreman followed her there with 2 hired men and watched from the porch while she packed. Sabine moved through the house slowly, touching the familiar things she could not carry. Her mother's mixing bowl, her father's shaving cup, the walnut table with a burn mark from the winter of her 12th year, the narrow bed where Elias had died. Every room looked smaller because she knew she was leaving it. In the kitchen, she reached for the blue seed book, but the shelf was empty. Looking for something, Adrian Kells asked from the doorway. Sabine turned. He had arrived without a horse, perhaps walking from the road so she would not hear him. "You have the book." "What book?" "My father's seed records." Kells stepped inside. "You still believe your father hid some magical proof?" "He hid something. Then perhaps he hid it from you because he did not trust you." Sabine stared at him. "You are afraid of a dead farmer's notebook." "I am afraid of nothing." "Then give it back." He walked close enough that she could smell the sharp soap on his collar. "Marry me, Sabine. Sign the farm into our household, and all this struggle ends. People will stop laughing when you enter a room. They will call you Mrs. Kells. They will stand when you pass. Because they fear you. Respect and fear often share a doorway. I would rather sleep beneath that doorway than live behind it with you." For the first time, his pleasant expression vanished completely. "You think anyone else will want you?" he asked. "You think some man will look at you and see a wife instead of a burden?" Sabine felt the old pain rise, but she did not let him see it settle. "I would rather be unwanted than owned." Kells reached into his coat and removed a single torn page. Sabine recognized her father's handwriting. At the top was a list of grain shipments. At the bottom was half of a coded note. Kells folded it once and slipped it back into his pocket. "Your father should have been more careful," he said. "So should you." That night, Sabine returned to town with 1 trunk and no place to sleep. Mrs. Bell had an empty room above her shop, but she claimed the stairs were not safe for someone of Sabine's size. The hotel keeper said every bed was taken, though Sabine could see 3 room keys hanging behind him. Reverend Hale offered a blanket in the church storage room, then changed his mind after Sheriff Pate spoke privately to him. By 9 o'clock, Sabine sat beneath the awning of a closed feed store, while cold rain darkened the street. No one came to help. She placed her trunk beneath her feet and pulled her coat tight around her body. The weight of the day finally broke through the wall she had built around herself. She cried without sound, shoulders shaking, tears slipping down her cheeks and into the collar of her dress. She did not cry because strangers had mocked her. She had survived that before. She cried because people who knew her father had allowed a lie to swallow his name. She cried because the town had watched Kells take the house where her mother had sung while baking bread, and not one person had spoken. She cried because some part of her still feared Kells was right. Perhaps no one would ever choose her unless there was a price attached. A soft tap came from inside the feed store window. Sabine wiped her face and looked up. A boy named Owen Reed stood behind the glass. He was 15, thin as a fence rail, and worked nights cleaning the store. He opened the side door just wide enough to speak. "Miss Orra, you should go back inside. I found this under the counter after Mr. Kells came by." He pushed a small brass key into her hand. A piece of blue thread was tied through its round head. Sabine stared at it. Her father used blue thread to mark tools and boxes that belonged to the North Orchard. "Did Kells drop it?" she asked. Owen shook his head. "No. Your father gave it to me 2 months ago. He said I was to leave it where you would search after losing something important." Sabine's breath caught. "Why did you wait?" Shame crossed the boy's face. "My mother owes Kells money. Sheriff Pate said they would take our house if I helped you." "Then why help me now?" Owen looked toward the empty street. "Because I watched them laugh today." His voice became small. "And I laughed too, once." "Not today. Last summer, some boys said you broke a wagon step, and I laughed. I knew it was mean, but I wanted them to like me. My mother says fear can make a coward out of anybody. I think she was warning me not to let it. Sabine closed her hand around the key. What does it open? I do not know. Your father only said the north orchard remembers the first frost. Before she could ask more, a shadow moved across the far end of the street. Owen quickly shut the door. Sabine spent the next hour beneath the awning, turning the words over in her mind. The north orchard remembers the first frost. Her father had planted 24 apple trees there, but only 18 survived the first winter. Each year, he marked the first frost by carving a line into the door of the old packing shed. The shed had been torn down when Sabine was 14, and the wood had been used to repair a grain wagon. She suddenly remembered which wagon. It belonged to the freight office Adrian Kells now owned. More important, it had been retired behind the livery stable after one wheel cracked. Sabine waited until the street was empty, then moved through the alley. Her size made silence difficult, but rain covered the sound of her boots. Behind the livery, she found the old freight wagon beneath a rotting canvas. The sideboards had been replaced, but the driver's box was original. Along its underside, she felt shallow marks in the wood. One line for each year. At the first frost mark from her 14th year, her fingers found a small metal plate. The brass key opened it. Inside the narrow compartment lay a folded map, a silver button, and a note written in her father's hand. Sabine read it by the light of a nearby window. The ledger is where a bell rings for no church. Begin with the seed count. Trust the man who carries winter in silence. She read the last sentence twice. It meant nothing to her. Somewhere behind the stable, a horse stamped. Sabine folded the map and slipped it beneath her dress. Then lantern light swept across the alley. Sheriff Pate entered with 2 of Kells's riders. "There she is!" one man shouted. Sabine ran. She was not fast, and she had never pretended to be. Her heavy skirts pulled at her legs. Mud sucked at her boots. Behind her, the riders spread into the street. One called, "Stop, Sabine. You are only making this worse." Another shouted that she had stolen private property. She passed the church, the closed blacksmith shop, and the eastern gate of town. A wagon moved slowly along the road ahead, loaded with flour sacks and mountain supplies. Sabine recognized the driver only by reputation. Tomas Venn came down from the high ridge 4 times a year. He traded hides, bought salt, and spoke to almost no one. Some said he had once been a teacher. Others said he had killed a man in Colorado. The only fact people agreed upon was that his wife and younger brother were dead, and Tomas had never forgiven the world for continuing without them. Sabine heard the riders closing behind her. She reached the wagon, seized the wooden gate, and climbed. Now, standing beside that same wagon half a mile beyond town, Sabine told Tomas only part of the truth. She said Kells had stolen her father's farm. She said she had found a map. She said the sheriff would return her to men who had no lawful reason to hold her. Tomas listened with his arms folded. The rain had changed to sleet, catching in his beard. "Let me see the map," he said. Sabine hesitated. "Why?" "Because you are on my road, in my wagon, bringing armed men behind you. You could take it. I could. You could give me to Kells. I could do that too." Sabine tightened her hand around the cloth beneath her dress. Tomas watched her for a moment, then turned away. "Keep it. You believe me. I believe Kells sends 4 men to search for something more valuable than a frightened woman." The words were blunt, but not cruel. Sabine looked toward the town. Lanterns moved again in the distance. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Home." "Is it far?" "Far enough that Kells's men will not follow in this weather." Sabine drew a breath. "Take me with you." Tomas looked back at her. "No, you already told them I was your wife. A sentence is not a promise. I have nowhere else. That does not make my home yours." Sabine swallowed. "Then let me ride until daylight. They will search the road at daylight. Then until the pass. The pass is 9 hours away." "Good," she said. "That gives you 9 hours to decide whether you hate my company." Tomas stared at her long enough that she feared he would lift her down from the wagon himself. Instead, he said, "Get under the canvas. If we cross the ridge before the snow thickens, you may live long enough to regret this. The road climbed into the mountains through pine forests that grew darker with every mile. Snow replaced the rain, soft at first, and then steady. Sabine sat beneath the wagon canvas with her knees drawn up, listening to the wheels grind over stone. Tomas did not speak. Near midnight, the wagon stopped beside a frozen creek. He built a small fire beneath an overhanging rock and handed Sabine a tin cup of coffee. She wrapped both hands around it. "Thank you," she said. Tomas sat across from her, his back against a tree. "Your father's note," he said. "What did it mean?" Sabine stiffened. "I did not tell you about a note. You touched the same place beneath your collar every time you mentioned the map." She looked down. "You notice too much. It keeps people alive. It also makes them unpleasant." A faint change touched his face. Not a smile, but perhaps the memory of one. Sabine took out the note and read the final line aloud. "Trust the man who carries winter in silence." Tomas's expression became still. "Did your father know me?" "I was going to ask you. He bought salt from me twice. Did you speak?" "Once." "About what?" Tomas stared into the fire. "Snow." Sabine waited, but he offered nothing else. "You carry winter in silence," she said. "Half this territory carries winter in silence. Not like you." His eyes lifted. "Do not turn a dying man's riddle into trust. You do not know me. I know you lied for me. That may have been poor judgment. I know you did not search me for the map. Yet," Sabine gave him a tired look. Tomas looked back into the fire, and this time she was certain he almost smiled. They reached his cabin near noon the following day. It stood on a shelf of land above a narrow valley, surrounded by pine trees and gray stone. The structure was larger than Sabine expected, with 2 rooms, a covered woodpile, a small stable, and a porch facing the eastern mountains. Nothing about it appeared neglected, but everything seemed built for survival rather than comfort. Inside, a table sat near the stove. 3 chairs surrounded it. One chair was covered with folded blankets, as if Tomas could not bear to remove it, but would not allow anyone to use it. A woman's blue cup rested on a shelf beside 2 plain tin cups. On the mantel stood a small carved bird with 1 broken wing. Sabine noticed these things before Tomas quietly moved the blue cup into a cabinet. "You can sleep in the back room," he said. "The door locks from inside. You think I am afraid of you?" "Yes." Sabine considered denying it. "A little." "Good. Fear is useful when you do not know a man. Is that how you speak to all your guests?" "I do not have guests." That was easy to guess. Tomas gave her a heavy shirt, wool socks, and a pair of trousers that had belonged to his brother. Sabine held the trousers against herself. "These will not fit. They are the largest I have. Your brother was narrow." Tomas turned away. He complained about it. Sabine heard something close in his voice. "I can mend the side seams. Do what you need." He went outside to secure the horses. Sabine changed, then stood before the small mirror beside the wash basin. The borrowed clothes were plain and poorly fitted, but they allowed her to move without fighting her skirts. Her face looked pale from exhaustion. Damp hair clung to her cheeks. She could still hear the livery boys laughing. Grain shed. Whole barn with boots. She sat on the edge of the bed and cried again, more quietly than before. She hated that the words followed her. She hated that strangers could throw them carelessly and leave her carrying them for years. When Tomas returned, she had washed her face, but the skin around her eyes remained red. He placed a bowl of stew on the table. "You are not required to hide tears here," he said. Sabine looked at him sharply. "I was not hiding." "Then you are poor at showing them." She almost laughed, though it hurt. "You truly are unpleasant. Eat before it cools." For 2 days, snow closed the ridge. Tomas checked his traps, split wood, and spoke only when necessary. Sabine rested at first, then began helping despite his objections. She repaired a torn blanket, reorganized sacks of dried beans, and discovered that Tomas stored nails beside tea, but kept matches in 3 different rooms. "This makes no sense," she told him. It makes sense to me. That is not the same thing. On the third morning, she found an old account book beneath a stack of newspapers. The cover bore the mark of the Bellwether Freight Company. "Where did this come from?" she asked. Tomas looked over from the stove. "Your father gave it to me." Sabine stood. "When?" "Last spring. You said you spoke to him once." "I did. You neglected to mention he gave you a book." Tomas removed the coffee pot from the heat. "He said if anyone asked, I had purchased it with scrap paper. Why did he trust you?" "He did not." "Then why give it to you?" "Because I was leaving town, and Kells's men were watching him." Sabine stepped closer. "What did my father say?" Tomas was silent for so long that anger began to rise inside her. "Tell me. He said you might come looking for it. Why did you not give it to me? I did not know who you were until you said your name. And after that? I wanted to know whether the men following you were real." Sabine picked up the book. "You could have told me on the road. You did not trust me. You gave me no reason. Trust given too quickly is usually need wearing a better coat." Sabine wanted to throw the account book at him. Instead, she opened it. Most pages contained ordinary freight entries, but several numbers were marked with tiny dots. She recognized her father's system. When Sabine was a child, Elias taught her to count orchard rows by shadow length, because he believed the mind stayed sharp when it solved ordinary problems in unusual ways. The dots did not mark individual numbers, they marked positions. First entry, third word. Fourth entry, second word. Sabine worked for an hour, while Tomas moved quietly around the room. At last, the hidden message appeared. "School bell, 12 steps west. Silver opens iron." Sabine removed the silver button from her pocket. "A bell rings for no church," she whispered. "The abandoned schoolhouse." Tomas leaned over the table, but did not touch the page. "It has been empty for 8 years. There is an old bell frame behind it. Kells owns the land around the school." "Of course he does." Sabine traced the coded line. "My father divided the truth. The ledger is there, or a trap is there. My father wrote this before he died. Kells may know about the message. Then we need to go before he finds the ledger." Tomas's jaw tightened. "The road is blocked. The snow will settle. Kells will be watching the town. I am not asking you to return." "Good." Sabine looked at him. "I can go alone." "No. You just said you would not return." "I said you will not go alone." "That sounds very much like a decision." "It is. You do not command me." "Then consider it a fact." That evening, Tomas found fresh horse tracks below the ridge. He studied them from the tree line before returning to the cabin. "2 riders," he said. "Maybe 3. They came within a mile." Sabine's stomach tightened. "Kells's men?" "Likely. Will they find the cabin?" "Not tonight." Tomas checked the rifle above the mantel, then secured the shutters. The simple movement frightened Sabine more than panic would have. She sat near the stove with the account book in her lap. "What happens if they come?" "They ask questions. And if they do not like the answers?" "Then they leave without liking them." "You speak as though nothing frightens you." Tomas looked at the shuttered window. "Many things frighten me, such as fire." The answer came too quickly. Sabine glanced toward the stove. Tomas saw her expression. "Not that kind." He sat across from her and rubbed his hands together. "My wife, Mara, and my brother Jude were traveling home from Bellwether 6 years ago. A freight wagon broke an axle above Cedar Gorge. It carried blasting powder for Kells's new quarry. The crates had been packed badly. A lantern fell." His voice became flatter with every sentence. "The fire crossed the road before anyone could free them." Sabine felt the room grow smaller. "Were you there?" "I reached them after." "I am sorry." Tomas gave a short nod, as though accepting information rather than sympathy. Kells blamed the driver. The driver disappeared. No hearing was held. "You think Kells was responsible?" "I think he valued speed more than safety, then paid people to forget." Sabine looked toward the cabinet where he had placed the blue cup. "Was that Mara's?" "Yes." "And the carved bird?" "Jude made it." Silence gathered between them. "My father may have known about the freight records," Sabine said. Tomas looked at her. "That may be why he chose me." The riders appeared the next afternoon. Tomas saw them from the stable and told Sabine to remain in the back room. "I will not hide beneath a bed," she said. "Then stand behind the door." That is still hiding. It is also surviving. She started to argue, then heard horses outside. Tomas opened the front door before the men could knock. Sabine stood where she could see through a narrow crack. Sheriff Pate had come with Adrian Kells himself. Kells wore a fur-lined coat and an expression of mild concern. "Tomas," he said, "you have chosen a difficult season for visitors." "I did not invite any. We are looking for Sabine Orra. You asked before. My men asked. I am asking now." Tomas leaned against the doorframe. "Why?" "She stole a map and business papers. More importantly, she is unwell." "Unwell?" "Her father's death disturbed her. She has made accusations. She may harm herself." Sabine closed her hands into fists. Kells continued. "I offered to care for her, but she misunderstood my intentions." "You intend marriage?" Tomas asked. Kells smiled faintly. "She told you." "She told me enough. Then you know she is vulnerable. You may believe you are helping, but keeping her here would create rumors neither of you wants." Tomas glanced toward the snowy trees. "I stopped caring about rumors years ago." Sheriff Pate moved closer. "We have authority to search. Show it." Pate removed a folded paper. Tomas took it, read it, and handed it back. "This authorizes a search of the lower timber road. The judge made an error. Then return with a corrected order." Kells studied Tomas's face. "You always did. Mistake isolation for strength." Tomas said nothing. "Your wife died because you could not protect her," Kells continued softly. "Do not repeat the experience with another woman." Sabine saw Tomas's hand tighten against the door. For one terrible second, she believed he would reach for the rifle. Instead, he said, "Leave my land." Kells's expression sharpened. "She will not remain loyal to you. Women like Sabine spend their lives starving for kindness. Give them one warm room, and they imagine love. Give them another, and they leave." Tomas stepped off the porch. "You have 10 seconds." Sheriff Pate placed a hand on his pistol. Tomas did not look at him. Kells mounted his horse. "When she understands what she has done, send her back. I may still be willing to forgive her." He turned his horse toward the trail. Before following, Sheriff Pate looked once at the cabin window. Sabine moved away from the crack. After they left, Tomas entered and closed the door. "Women like Sabine," she said. "What do you suppose he meant?" "He meant to hurt you. He succeeds more often than I would like." Tomas removed his coat. "Words are tools to men like Kells. They do not need to be true. They only need to reach the place already wounded." Sabine looked at him. "How do you know where I am wounded?" "Because you apologize to chairs before sitting in them." She frowned. "I do not. You test every chair first. You stand near walls so others have room. You eat slowly when I am watching and quickly when I leave. You pull your coat closed even beside the stove." Shame rose inside her. "You have been studying me. I notice things. And what have you decided?" Tomas met her eyes. "That the town taught you to move, as though your body is an offense." Sabine looked away. "Perhaps it is." "No." The word came with quiet force. She looked back. Tomas continued. "Your body carried you up the wagon in freezing rain. It worked your father's land. It brought you through the pass. The offense belongs to people who needed your shame to feel tall." Sabine's eyes filled before she could stop them. "You make that sound simple." "It is simple. It is not easy." "I did not say easy." The next week passed beneath watchful silence. Tomas found more tracks. Someone left a dead crow tied to a pine below the cabin, with a strip of blue cloth around its neck. Sabine recognized the cloth as part of her missing dress from the farm. Kells wanted her to know his men had searched every room she loved. Tomas cut the crow down and buried it without comment. That night, Sabine dreamed she was back in the courthouse square, while the entire town laughed. In the dream, her father stood among them, holding the forged note and saying nothing. She woke with a cry. Tomas appeared at the doorway, fully dressed, his rifle in hand. "What happened? A dream!" He lowered the rifle.
Kells! The town!
Tomas stood there uncertainly. Sabine realized he understood danger better than comfort. "You can come in," she said. He sat in the chair beside the bed, keeping distance between them. "After Mara and Jude died," he said, "I dreamed of the fire every night for a year. Then I stopped sleeping long enough to dream. What changed?" "Nothing. I became tired of being afraid of closing my eyes." Sabine wiped her face. "Did the dreams stop?" "No. They became part of the room." She looked at him through the darkness. "That is a sad answer. It is an honest one. Can grief become smaller?" Tomas thought before answering. "No. But the life around it can grow larger." On the first clear morning, they prepared to return to Bellwether. Tomas wanted to travel by the northern trail and reach the schoolhouse after dark. Sabine insisted they stop at the Orra farm first. "Kells will expect that," he said. "My father left another clue there." "You do not know that. The silver button belonged to his old winter coat. He wore it the year my mother planted the north orchard. The map shows the farm before it shows the school." Tomas examined the faded lines. "The mark could be a creek crossing. It is not. It is the root cellar." "How can you tell?" "Because I drew this map when I was 11. Tomas looked at her. "Why?" "My father said every child should know how to find home in the dark." Her voice softened. "I suppose he believed I still could." They left before sunrise, riding separate horses. Sabine's mare was broad and calm, chosen without comment. Tomas had altered the stirrups and reinforced the saddle cinch the night before. Sabine noticed, but did not thank him until they were miles down the trail. "You changed the saddle." "It needed changing. You could simply accept thanks." "I could, but you will not." "No." She smiled despite herself. The mountain air was cold and clean. As they descended, the white valley opened below them, bright beneath the morning sun. For several miles, the world seemed untouched by Kells. Sabine breathed more deeply than she had in weeks. Tomas rode ahead, then slowed, until they traveled side by side. "Mara loved mornings like this," he said. Sabine waited. She would stop every half-mile to look at the light. Jude complained that sunrise happened every day and did not require inspection. "Was he younger?" "By 9 years. Did he live with you?" "After our parents died." "So you raised him?" "Poorly, according to him." "You miss them when you laugh." Tomas looked at her. "I do not laugh." "You almost did." "That is not the same. It is close." They reached the Orra farm after sunset. Kells had posted 2 guards at the main house, but Sabine led Tomas through the dry creek bed behind the orchard. They left the horses among the cottonwoods and approached the root cellar from the lower field. Snow covered the doors. Sabine brushed it away, then pressed the silver button into a shallow round space beside the hinge. A hidden latch clicked. Tomas looked at her.
Your father built this?
He liked secrets more than was useful. Inside, the cellar smelled of soil, apples, and old wood. Shelves had been emptied, but one storage bin remained nailed to the wall. Sabine counted the boards from left to right, following the seed count from the account book. 18 living trees. The 18th board pulled free. Behind it lay a small tin box containing letters, bank receipts, and a photograph of Adrian Kells standing beside 3 freight wagons marked with false company names. Sabine spread the papers across a crate, while Tomas held the lantern. One letter showed that Kells had borrowed money from Elias Orra, not the other way around. Another contained instructions to duplicate Elias's signature. The receipts showed grain purchases paid with town relief funds after a flood, though the grain had never reached the families listed. "This proves fraud," Sabine whispered. Tomas picked up a freight manifest. His face changed. "What is it?" she asked. He handed it to her. The page listed blasting powder shipped 6 years earlier. The official record claimed the load weighed 800 pounds. A second handwritten column showed nearly twice that amount. The wagon had been dangerously overloaded. At the bottom was Adrian Kells's approval. "Mara and Jude," Sabine said. Tomas stared at the page. He knew. A floorboard creaked above them. Tomas extinguished the lantern. Voices moved through the farmhouse kitchen. "Check the cellar," a man said. Sabine heard the outer door scrape. Tomas placed the tin box in her arms and guided her toward the rear wall. "There is no other exit," she whispered. "There is now." He took a small hatchet from his belt and began loosening boards behind an empty shelf. Sabine joined him, using her shoulder to push the frame away from the wall. The cellar door opened. Lantern light appeared at the top of the steps. "Who is down there?" a guard called. Tomas removed one board. The opening was narrow. Sabine looked at it. "I cannot fit." "You can." "Tomas, turn sideways." The guard started down the steps. Tomas pulled another board free. Sabine pushed one shoulder through, then the other. The rough wood caught her coat. She heard the guard shout. Tomas shoved the tin box after her, then braced both hands against her back. "Breathe out," he said. "I am trying. Try less loudly. This is not the moment for humor." It was not humor. She forced herself forward. The board cracked, and she fell into the snow behind the cellar wall. Tomas came through seconds later as a shot struck the dirt near the opening. They ran across the field. Sabine clutched the box against her chest. The guards followed, shouting. At the creek bed, Tomas boosted Sabine onto her mare, then mounted his horse. A second shot split the air. Tomas jerked in the saddle. "Are you hit?" Sabine cried. "Ride." They pushed the horses through the cottonwoods and into the darkness. After half a mile, Tomas began to lean. Sabine saw blood darkening his coat near the shoulder. "You are hit. It passed through. You do not know that. I know where my shoulder ends. Then you know you are bleeding." He swayed again. Sabine caught his sleeve from her saddle. "Stay awake." "I am awake." "You sound sleepy. You sound loud." "Good. Be annoyed." They reached an abandoned shepherd's cabin before midnight. Tomas nearly fell while dismounting. Sabine took his weight against her body and guided him inside. The cabin had no bed, only a table, a stone hearth, and old straw. She built a fire, boiled snow, and cut away his shirt. The bullet had torn through the upper part of his shoulder without striking bone, but the wound bled steadily. Tomas tried to take the cloth from her. "I can do it." "With one hand? I have had worse." "That is not an answer." Sabine cleaned the wound and tied the bandage tightly. Tomas's face went pale, but he did not complain. "You saved the box?" he asked. "Yes." "Good. You could have died, but the box is safe." Anger moved through Sabine. "Do not speak as though your life is less important than paper. That paper proves what Kells did. And you think Mara and Jude would want you to die carrying it." Tomas looked away. Sabine's voice softened. "You have been living like a man who believes surviving them was a betrayal." His jaw tightened. "You do not know what I believe. Then tell me. I should have been with them. Would you have stopped the fire? Maybe. Would you have known the wagon was overloaded? No. Then you would have died too. Maybe." Sabine sat back. "And that is what you wanted." Tomas closed his eyes. "For a long time." The fire cracked between them. Sabine placed one hand over his uninjured arm. "I am glad you did not." He opened his eyes. There was grief in them, but also surprise. Perhaps no one had said those words to him before. They remained in the cabin until dawn. Tomas slept for an hour while Sabine studied the papers. She found references to the schoolhouse and a set of numbers matching the seed book. Near sunrise, Tomas woke and saw her arranging documents across the floor. "You should rest," he said. "So should you." "I did." "You closed your eyes and frowned for an hour." "That is rest." Sabine pointed to a page. "The ledger is still at the schoolhouse. These papers prove pieces, but the main book must show every payment. Then we go there. You can barely lift your arm. I can ride. You will stay here." Tomas gave her a hard look. "No. You told me fear is useful when I do not know a man. I know you better now, and I know you will open that wound pretending you are invincible. I never claimed that. You perform it daily." Tomas stood too quickly and gripped the table. Sabine raised an eyebrow. "A powerful performance." He sat again. "You cannot go alone. I will not. Who will help you? The town. Tomas almost laughed, though the movement hurt his shoulder. The town sold your farm. Not everyone wanted to. Wanting is not courage. No, but shame can become courage, if given a place to stand. Sabine gathered the letters. Owen helped me. Others may help if they know we have proof. Or they may hand you to Kells. Then I will learn who they are. That is a dangerous lesson. I have already paid for it. They traveled toward Bellwether by a hidden logging trail. Tomas's fever rose before noon. Sabine stopped at the isolated home of a widow named May Talbot, who had once worked as a clerk in Kells's freight office. May opened the door, saw Tomas's wound, and immediately pulled them inside. She was a small woman with silver hair and sharp brown eyes. Kells's men passed an hour ago, she said while cleaning the wound. They claim Sabine attacked guards and stole company records. Sabine placed the tin box on the table. The records were my father's. May examined the letters. Her hands began to tremble. I typed some of these agreements. Did you know they were false? Sabine asked. May sat down. Not at first. Later, yes. The answer hurt more because it was honest. Why did you stay silent? May looked toward the window. My husband was dying. Kells paid the doctor. After Daniel died, Kells reminded me what he had done. He said gratitude was a debt that never expired. And my father? Elias confronted me. He knew the freight numbers were wrong. I told him to leave it alone. Tears filled May's eyes. I told myself I was protecting him. I was protecting me. Sabine unfolded the schoolhouse clue. You can help now. May looked at Tomas. What are you planning? A public meeting, Sabine said. Tomorrow is the monthly claims hearing. Judge Harland will be in town. Every land transfer is entered before him. Kells controls the courthouse, not the judge. He controls the sheriff. Then we do not give the sheriff time to hide the evidence. We find the ledger tonight, copy the important pages, and place them in many hands before morning. May studied Sabine as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Your father said you were the clever one. People thought he meant kind. He did not. Owen met them behind May's house after dark. He brought Reverend Hale, the hotel cook, and Mr. Lyle from the neighboring farm. Mr. Lyle could barely look at Sabine. I should have spoken at the auction, he said. Yes, she answered. He blinked, perhaps expecting comfort. Sabine did not give it. I was afraid Kells would call my note, he continued. He may still. Then help me make sure he cannot call anyone's note again. Reverend Hale removed his hat. Sabine, I turned you away from the church. Yes. I believed avoiding conflict would protect the congregation. It protected Kells. The Reverend lowered his head. Yes. Tomas watched from a chair near the stove, his injured arm bound. Sabine noticed he was allowing her to lead without interruption. It mattered more than praise. Near midnight, they approached the abandoned schoolhouse in pairs. The building stood beyond the old quarry road, its roof sagging beneath snow. Behind it, a wooden bell frame remained, even though the bell had been removed years before. Sabine counted 12 steps west from the center post. Beneath the snow, she found a flat iron plate. The silver button fit into a shallow slot. When she turned it, the plate lifted. Below was a narrow stone chamber containing a leather ledger wrapped in oilcloth. Sabine held it against her chest while the others gathered around. The first pages listed ordinary grain sales. The later pages recorded secret payments to Sheriff Pate, false debts placed against farms, bribes to witnesses, and money paid to hide unsafe freight shipments. One line showed payment to a doctor shortly before Elias Orra became ill. Sabine stopped breathing. What does that mean? Owen asked. May read the entry. It does not prove murder. No, Sabine said slowly. But it proves Kells paid the doctor while my father was questioning him. Tomas moved beside her. That investigation comes later. Sabine nodded, though her hands shook. She could not let grief pull her away from the work. They carried the ledger to May's house and copied pages until dawn. Owen delivered sealed copies to shop owners. Reverend Hale placed one beneath the church pulpit. Mr. Lyle sent another, with a rancher traveling east. May prepared a written statement about the freight records. Tomas wrote his own account of the fire that killed Mara and Jude. Sabine wrote nothing at first. She sat alone beside the window, looking toward the faint lights of town. Tomas approached quietly. "You are thinking about your father." "I am thinking about the doctor. The ledger may not tell the whole story." "Kells paid him." "Yes." "My father grew weaker after every visit." "Yes." Sabine pressed both hands against the table. "I want to hurt him." Tomas did not pretend to misunderstand. "Kells. I want him to feel afraid. I want him to stand in the square while people look at him the way they looked at me." "He may. That is not enough." "No," Tomas said. "It may never feel like enough." Sabine looked at him. "Then what do I do with that?" "You decide whether justice is meant to heal you or merely stop him. What is the difference? Stopping him is possible. Healing may take longer." He placed the ledger in front of her. "Do not let your pain persuade you to become careless. Kells expects anger. Give him patience." The claims hearing began at 10 o'clock. Judge Harlan sat behind a long table in the courthouse, while farmers waited to register winter debts and spring leases. Adrian Kells stood near the front, speaking quietly with Sheriff Pate. Sabine entered through the main doors wearing her brown dress, repaired and brushed clean. Tomas walked beside her with one arm in a sling. Behind them came May, Owen, Reverend Hale, Mr. Lyle, and several citizens holding copied pages. The room became silent. Someone whispered, "She came back." Another voice answered, "Look at Venn." Sabine felt every eye turned toward her body. The old instinct told her to shrink, to move aside, to apologize for taking space. She ignored it. She walked down the center aisle and stopped before the judge. Kells recovered first. "Your Honor, this woman is wanted for theft and assault." Judge Harlan looked at Sheriff Pate. "Do you have a warrant?" Pate produced a paper. The judge read it. "This is signed by you." "Yes, sir." "You are not a judge. Emergency authority. Does not include land disputes." Kells stepped forward. "The documents she stole belong to my company." Sabine placed the original ledger on the table. "Then you admit the ledger is yours." Kells stopped. A small sound moved through the room. Judge Harlan opened the book. "What is this?" "A record Adrian Kells hid beneath the old schoolhouse," Sabine said. "It contains payments, forged debts, false freight numbers, and bribes." Kells laughed softly. "A book can be written by anyone." "That is true," Sabine said. "Which is why we also brought letters bearing your signature, bank receipts, freight records, and witnesses." May stepped forward. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. "I worked for Mr. Kells for 9 years. I copied false agreements under his instruction. I changed freight numbers after shipments left the yard. I remained silent because I was afraid." Mr. Lyle spoke next. "Kells threatened to take my farm if I testified for Elias Orra." Reverend Hale admitted Kells had used church debts to pressure him. The hotel cook described overhearing Kells instruct Sheriff Pate to keep Sabine without charge if she refused marriage. Kells looked around the room, and for the first time, his confidence seemed uncertain. "These people are protecting themselves," he said. "They are shifting blame." Sabine met his eyes. "Some of them are guilty of cowardice." Several faces lowered. "But cowardice does not make your records true." Kells pointed toward Tomas. "And what of him? A bitter recluse, blaming me for an old accident." Tomas placed the overloaded freight manifest beside the ledger. "This shipment killed my wife and brother. The driver caused that fire. The driver was paid $200 from your private account and disappeared the next day." Judge Harlan turned pages slowly. "Mr. Kells, I see that same payment here." Sheriff Pate reached for the ledger. "This evidence must be secured." Sabine put one hand over the book. "Copies are already outside Bellwether." The sheriff stopped. "One is with a rancher headed east," she continued. "One is in the church. One is with Judge Harlan's clerk. Others are held by people in this room. Taking the ledger will change nothing." A murmur of approval moved through the crowd. It was not loud, but it was the first sound the town had made for her. Kells's face hardened. "You think these people respect you now?" he asked. "You think a few papers have changed what they say when your back is turned?" The insult hung in the room. Sabine felt its familiar shape. Kells stepped closer. "They laughed at you before I ever spoke your name. They pitied your father for having a daughter no man wanted. They watched me take the farm because they believed someone like you could never hold it." Tomas shifted, but Sabine raised one hand, asking him to remain still. She looked at the crowd. "He is right about one thing," she said. "You watched." The room became painfully quiet. Sabine turned slowly, meeting the eyes of people she had known all her life. "You watched when he called my father a liar. You watched when he took our house. Some of you laughed when men mocked my body. Others stayed silent because silence was cheaper than courage. You told yourselves you were helpless because that made cowardice easier to carry." Reverend Hale began to speak, but Sabine continued. "I do not need excuses today. I need the truth. Did Adrian Kells own your silence? Or did you give it freely?" For several seconds no one answered. Then Mrs. Bell from the dry goods shop stepped forward. "I gave it," she said. "He threatened my lease, but I still gave it." The livery boy who had mocked Sabine lowered his head. "I laughed, because others laughed." The hotel keeper admitted 3 rooms had been empty. One farmer said Kells had promised to reduce his debt if he testified that Elias was confused. Another admitted he had signed a false witness statement. Each confession seemed to weaken something invisible in the room. Adrian Kells had ruled Bellwether by making every person believe they were alone in their fear. Now their shame was becoming public, and public shame was turning into shared anger. Sheriff Pate moved toward the side door. Judge Harland noticed. "Remain where you are. I need to secure the street." "You need to surrender your badge." Pate stared at him. 2 ranchers stepped into his path. No one drew a weapon. No one needed to. The sheriff slowly removed the badge. Kells looked at Sabine with naked hatred. "You will regret this." She stood calmly before him. "You said that before. Your father regretted crossing me." Tomas stepped forward, but Sabine again held him back. She wanted Kells's words heard. Judge Harland rose. "Mr. Kells, that statement will be included in the inquiry into Elias Orra's death." Kells realized too late what he had revealed. He tried to smile. "You misunderstand. Then you may explain it under oath." The hearing lasted all day. By evening, Judge Harland froze every land transfer connected to Kells, ordered an outside marshal to take custody of the records, and restored temporary possession of the Orra farm to Sabine while the forged debt was reviewed. Sheriff Pate was detained for obstruction and fraud. Adrian Kells was not dragged through the street or beaten by a crowd. He was escorted from the courthouse beneath the eyes of people who no longer lowered theirs. For a man who had built his power on admiration and fear, that quiet loss of control seemed worse than violence. When Sabine stepped outside, snow had begun to fall. The square where people had mocked her was filled with citizens waiting in silence. Some approached to apologize. Others did not know how. Sabine accepted no easy promises. "Do better when the next person needs you," she told them. "That will mean more than saying you are sorry to me." Owen stood near the courthouse steps, smiling nervously. Sabine squeezed his shoulder. "You were brave. I was late. Late courage still has work to do." Tomas waited beside the wagon. His face was pale from the wound, but his eyes were brighter than she had ever seen them. Sabine stopped before him. "You lied about having a wife," she said. "I did. You hid me on your mountain." "Yes. You argued with nearly every decision I made. Most of them were dangerous. You followed them anyway. Someone had to keep you from being shot." She looked at his sling. "You failed at that for yourself." Tomas glanced toward the falling snow. "I may need practice." Sabine smiled. Then her expression softened. "You did not save me. I know. You gave me a place to breathe until I could save myself." Tomas met her eyes. "You gave me one too." The court formally returned the Orra farm 6 weeks later. Investigators discovered 17 forged debts, missing relief funds, unsafe freight records, and evidence that Adrian Kells had paid the town doctor to keep Elias weak with unnecessary medicine. The doctor admitted he had not intended to kill him, but fear and greed had guided his choices until the difference no longer mattered. Kells was taken east to face multiple charges. His stores were sold to repay families. His name disappeared from the grain mill and the freight office. Bellwether did not transform overnight into a noble town. People still whispered. Some apologies remained shallow. Some citizens resented Sabine for forcing them to see themselves clearly. But the town changed in smaller, harder ways. Reverend Hale opened the church cellar to travelers. Mrs. Bell offered fair leases to 2 widows. The hotel keeper stopped refusing rooms to people he considered inconvenient. The livery boys learned that laughter could wound long after the joke was forgotten. Sabine returned to her farm in early spring. The house had been damaged during Kells' search. Drawers were broken, walls marked, and her father's room left in disorder. For the first week, she worked alone because she needed to touch every broken thing and decide whether it should be repaired or released. Tomas visited from the mountain, first to mend the roof, then to rebuild the root cellar door, then for reasons neither of them named. He never entered without knocking. He never moved her belongings without asking. When Sabine chose to hire workers from town, he did not question her. When she decided to turn part of the farmhouse into an office where farmers could review contracts before signing, he built shelves for the records. One warm evening, they sat beneath the recovering apple trees. Pink blossoms covered the branches. Sabine held the blue seed book, which investigators had found in Kells's locked desk. "My father knew he might not survive," she said. "He spent his last months hiding pieces of truth for me." Tomas looked toward the orchard. "He knew you would find them. I wish he had trusted me enough to tell me plainly. Maybe he was trying to protect you. People cause great harm while trying to protect others from choices." Tomas nodded. "That is true." Sabine looked at him. "Do you still dream of the fire?" "Yes. Every night." "No. What changed?" He watched a blossom fall onto the grass. The life around it grew larger. Their love did not arrive like lightning. It came in cups of coffee left warm on cold mornings. It came when Tomas repaired the porch, without assuming Sabine needed a stronger step. It came when Sabine placed Mara's blue cup back on the cabin shelf and asked Tomas to tell her one happy story instead of only the final one. It came when he admitted Mara sang badly but loudly, and Jude once tried to train a goat to pull a sled through the kitchen. It came when Sabine allowed Tomas to see her crying without turning away in shame. It came when he touched her, only after asking, and when his eyes held affection without hunger for control. The first time Tomas told Sabine she was beautiful, she looked suspicious. "You do not need to say that because we are alone. I know. Or because you feel sorry for me. I do not. Or because you think it is the correct thing." Tomas considered this. "I rarely know the correct thing." She laughed. "That is true." He stepped closer, stopping where she could choose the remaining distance. "You are beautiful when you are angry, though somewhat frightening. You are beautiful when you solve a problem before anyone else notices there is one. You are beautiful when you sit beneath these trees and forget to make yourself smaller." Sabine's eyes filled. "That is a great many words for you. I have been saving them." They married the following autumn beneath the apple trees. The ceremony was small. Owen stood beside Tomas. May held Sabine's flowers. Reverend Hale spoke briefly, because Sabine warned him the food would cool. No one called Tomas her rescuer. No one described Sabine as fortunate to have finally found a man. They were simply 2 people who had survived different kinds of loneliness and chosen to build something neither could create alone. After the ceremony, Sabine stood on the porch of the farmhouse while music drifted from the orchard. She wore a deep green dress made to fit her body rather than hide it. The cloth followed the full shape of her waist and shoulders without apology. A few years earlier, she would have tugged at the sleeves and wondered what people saw. Now she watched children run between the trees and farmers laugh beside tables heavy with food. Tomas came to stand near her. You are quiet, he said. I am listening. To what? Sabine looked across the land her father had loved, the land Kells had nearly stolen, the land she had reclaimed through patience, courage, and truth. To a home that belongs to me. Tomas raised an eyebrow. To us, she corrected, but also to me. That sounds fair. She rested her hand in his. The grief they carried had not vanished. Elias was still gone. Mara and Jude were still gone. The years of insults had left marks that kind words could not instantly erase. Yet none of those losses controlled the future. Sabine had learned that strength was not the absence of sorrow. It was the decision to remain fully alive while sorrow walked beside you. Tomas had learned that loving someone new did not betray those he had lost. It honored the part of him they had once loved. As evening settled over the orchard, the old school bell rang from the porch. Tomas had repaired it and brought it to the farm as a wedding gift. Its sound traveled across the fields, clear and steady, calling no one to church and warning no one of danger. It rang only because Sabine had chosen to pull the rope. The people of Bellwether heard it in their homes and shops. Some remembered the courthouse. Some remembered their silence. Some remembered the day a woman they had treated as weak stood before them and forced an entire town to look at the cost of fear. Sabine listened until the final note faded into the hills. Then she looked at Tomas and smiled. For the first time in her life, she did not wonder whether she was too large, too loud, too difficult, or too much. She understood that she had never been too much. The world around her had simply been too small.